All right, so welcome to the latest Cup of Theology, and I have the incomparable Dr. Beth Gerhardt with us. Hi, Beth. How are you?
I'm fine.
So
Thanks
exciting
for
to have
chatting
you.
with me.
Yeah, it's so great to have
I'm
you.
always up for coffee too.
So that's the question. We have to decide where we're going: Tim Hortons or Dunkin' Donuts, and why.
Yeah, I am a coffee person.
Awesome.
Um, yeah, my first choice would be Starbucks, but with these two, it's Tim Hortons. I
Okay.
don't know. Dunkin' Donuts is a little weak for me or
Uh-huh,
something.
okay.
I don't know. Tim Hortons.
It's a little
Amazing.
more of a
little,
kick in
little,
it. Okay.
A little more substantial.
Interesting.
Or that's my perception. I don't know
Okay.
if that's
That's
reality.
awesome. I love it.
Yeah, I do like Tim Hortons.
Well, Tim Hortons,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
is.
Yeah.
So you teach one of the great conversation courses,
Yes.
and that's being mission.
Yes.
Phenomenal course.
Exciting.
Why do you think that's important to the great conversation?
I really think, well, for a couple reasons. It's at the heart, right, of who we are as a people of God and
Okay.
what we do, because it's all about God's mission.
Yes.
So I see mission as in a very broad way.
Okay.
Actually, when the students come into the class, I ask them to kind of write their own definition of mission, what their perception is,
Yes.
and then tuck it away.
Okay.
And then at the end of the course, we have a discussion, or they rewrite or look at what they wrote, and it's usually very different, because many Christians, right, we grow up in church, we think of missions as going out and
Okay.
going overseas and doing a 2-week mission trip, or longer term thing. And I really see mission, it's God's work in the world. God's mission is one of reconciliation and restoration. So we see that in a very broad way that extends even beyond what the work of the church is. It's about God's work, and then us discerning, how do we enter into it? What's the call into God's mission?
That's amazing.
So it's very broad.
So that's a very
Um,
different from what we traditionally think of
Yes.
mission.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so.
That's phenomenal.
So there's that, and also where it falls with the historically with the other great conversation courses. So another course focuses on early church kind of history. What were those conversations going on then?
Okay.
Reformation. This course focuses on more contemporary 19th, 20th century conversations.
Okay.
So we look at what were people talking about then in terms of mission,
That's
in
amazing.
terms of God's work.
Okay. Speaking of God's work,
Yeah.
coffee.
Yeah.
Yes. What will you?
Could I actually get an iced coffee
Yeah.
with milk?
All
no
right.
sugar.
Can I have 2 iced coffees with milk, no sugar?
Just a small is fine.
Small. Nope, that's all. Thank you. Awesome. So I can drink iced coffee all year round. And
Oh, me
yeah,
too. I do
totally.
that. Yeah.
Like,
Sometimes people look at me weird when
Yeah,
I
I
go
love
in. It's 18
right.
degrees out.
Exactly.
I'm like,
I'm
iced
like,
coffee.
yes,
They're like,
and extra
really?
ice, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Exactly.
No, I love it.
Exactly,
No,
yeah.
that's awesome. So you were mentioning that when students first take the class, they kind of write down their perception, and you're saying it's wildly different by the
Yeah,
end.
so for example, we'll start looking at the 19th century and the Second Great Awakening at the early part of the 19th century, how those involved, how that really kind of also kicked off some of the social changes in the 19th century.
Okay.
So many kind of revivalists or those involved, also like a Theodore Well, Grimke
Yes.
sisters, became involved in the abolitionism movement and then the suffrage
Okay.
movement. So we look at God's mission very broadly and also socially and in relationships, both individually but also corporately.
Okay.
And in terms of God's, again, reconciliation, restoration in the 19th century, what was God about in
Wow.
terms of that? And it's a very kind of holistic movement. So we want to look at actually specific conversations. So
That's
we look at,
awesome.
for example, a couple of letters from these Grimke sisters,
Yes,
Angela
yes, yes.
and
That's
Catherine
right.
Grimke, or Sarah Grimke, I'm sorry,
Yes.
and which are really fascinating because they're writing, and one of them is pleading with their white sisters, pay attention to what's going on with our African American sisters who are being, and she's very
Wow.
graphic because they grew up in a plantation.
Okay.
Very graphic about the whippings and all that. So there's a plea for
Wow.
that. and very like.
All right, 451.
Thank you.
There's that. Here is this
Thank
iced
you,
coffee.
thank you, thank you.
Thank
And
you.
then here's this one.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
So very prophetic too, because you could. The students are astounded because you could read
And
it
here you go.
today.
You're all set.
Yes. Have a good one. Can I have a receipt, please?
yeah.
Thank you.
You could read those letters today and go, wow, we're
current
having
events.
the same kind of conversation.
Thank you, you too.
Because they're appealing to the Imago Dei, that God has created females the same
Wow.
as men, the image of God. And so therefore, why aren't women equal? Why aren't women voting? Why are women
Wow.
even treated? They talk about women being treated as objects and subject to violence.
Yes.
And one of them ends the letter, someday even a woman will end up president of the United States. And the students always kind of quick. I said, okay, 200 years later,
Still
that hasn't. But,
so close,
you
but
know,
not right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but
Interesting.
very prophetic. And these were leaders who also were involved and knew Frederick Douglass. He promoted their work, published their letters also, Theodore Weld. So these are cross conversations between abolitionists, feminists. You know, sometimes we use that word today and people go, oh, that's not Christian.
Yes.
Actually, most of the feminists in the 19th century in their work were doing it because they were Christians.
Wow.
So the 19th century is just this wonderful kind of place we can rest and listen in on these conversations and see God's mission in the world and how He's working, and then what people are talking about.
That's amazing.
You know, and then what comes from that. Excuse me, the fruit of that. And then the 20th century, we really carry through those themes and look at, wow, there was a real tie-in, for example, with the civil rights movement in the 20th century, in those conversations going on. With the abolitionist movement in the 19th century, and then subsequently the women's movement also coming out of civil rights in our country and globally. So we look at themes across time, we listen in on conversations, and we bring them forward.
Okay.
So how does God's mission today of reconciliation, restoration, how does that resonate with what God was doing 200 years ago, 100 years ago? You know, what kind of conversations are we having today that someone from the 19th century could listen into and go, wow, they're still talking about that, or they're,
And you know what, I think
they're still
that's-
engaged
That's one of the
with those
awesome,
same questions.
the awesome parts of the course is, you know, that end project where, you know, you address an issue, you know, and you talk about what that means for today.
Yeah.
So it's just amazing, just coming full circle like that.
Yeah, so I really want the students to end with kind of the so what, and what's your framework, or what's your larger paradigm for thinking about these questions today.
Okay.
And you can, you know, I think sometimes the church, we're reactors. So, we're aware now of childhood poverty, let's say in Rochester.
Okay.
What do? Let's set up a committee. Let's join this. Let's have a food.
Wow.
So we react to an issue rather than what Dietrich Bonhoeffer talks about is Christ is our point of departure, and that we need to listen. Listening is so, I think, very central to this work.
Yes, yes.
Listen in on God's working in different areas, and then as a community we discern, right, and understand how everything is linked together in God's mission.
That's amazing.
You know, God's just not about justice over here, but not here.
Yes.
Right? Which Martin Luther King Jr. talked about so eloquently, that we're all connected in this fabric,
Yes.
this weaving. So that's why I hope the students will take away with it, would be able to do a really good analysis of their own theologies and their own understanding in a broader way of how they're connected theologically with others.
Okay.
And then how do you respond then to what's going on today? Or
Okay.
how should the church be responsive, right,
Okay.
to these issues?
Amazing.
Yeah.
So, which brings us to immigration, a call to action.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that. It's fascinating.
Yeah, so this conference, the quick background,
Okay.
is 4 years ago, Dr. Norm Wetterow and his wife Nancy very generously gave us some funding to put a conference on every 2 years.
Oh, wonderful.
Dr. Wetterow's, and I agree with him, his concern is He didn't want a conference where you just go and get information. And then
Okay.
you walk out and go, oh, that's interesting. And 2 days later, right? You go,
Sure.
wait a minute, what? Or I forget what, someone says, what did you listen to? And you
Okay.
forget half of it. I mean, if you're like me, right?
Yes, I've been there.
So he really wanted something that the students were very engaged in and
Okay.
focused on policy and change, like a call to action, which was wonderful. So the focus of these conferences is for the students to study themselves through a course of
Interesting.
study. So the students that are putting this on started in September, studying
Wow.
immigration. So they've been
Okay.
studying since September,
Okay.
looking at national issues, regional issues, local issues around immigration.
Wow.
Studying the language we use, studying our prejudices, our biases, what should be, again, part of God's mission, what's God calling us to in helping marginalize and oppress.
Wow. So they're subject experts, was.
Yeah, so they become like mini experts, and
Wow.
actually at the end, they're, because of all their reading and everything, they're putting together kind of a mini portfolio of all their work. But it leads up to this conference. The first one we had was on sex trafficking 4
Okay.
years ago. 2 years ago was childhood poverty. This year's on immigration. So it's a little bit twofold. We look at immigration in terms of what farm workers go through. I think for upstate New York, it's very relevant,
Oh, sure.
right?
Sure.
And our dairy farms and the food that we buy in the grocery store doesn't magically appear there. We have a lot of
Yes, that's
farm
right.
workers who are
That's right.
undocumented. And so we have people coming in to talk about, experts, community activists, about what their life is like. And being undocumented, being here kind of in the shadows.
Okay.
So we look at it nationally. Our main speaker, Marlena Graves, will talk about kind of a national perspective, but then look at that. And then the other part of it is refugees. I just learned, actually this week in a conversation, I didn't know this, that Rochester, I think it's like, in the Buffalo area, this area is like the 5th largest in the United States for the
Really?
recipient of refugees, like
That's-
tens of thousands.
Wow.
I had no idea
Oh my
there's
goodness.
just that. Yeah.
Interesting.
So I've also gotten quite an education about what's existing in Rochester, which is some wonderful stuff going on that churches are involved with. So we'll be looking at how can churches start to be engaged, making really, so what are some volunteer opportunities? Because we often hear people say, oh yeah, but what do I do?
Right.
What
Sure, how
can
do
my
I-
church engage?
Yeah.
So that is the focus, is a call to action, how they can engage in this work. So we have wonderful community activists, experts, really great range. I would say we have all the top, I'm not excited, the top experts
That's
in our area. I
amazing.
think we captured all of them.
And this is March 13th.
March 13th.
Okay.
Yeah, and so it's been a great student learning experience,
Okay.
and I think it's an opportunity for the community to come to see what we do.
It's amazing.
We do our work in the classroom, but our really work is to equip and engage those in the community too, around this work, around God's mission.
Oh, sure.
So yeah, I think
That's
the immigration
exciting.
conference is a great connector to the missions course, actually.
That is exciting. And so, as the social justice students organize this symposium, they're coming up with topics, or how are they?
Yeah, so we start the course like in September.
Okay.
They'll bring up ideas that they're
Okay,
passionate
gotcha.
about or they think is really relevant. Like what's in the news? What is the church maybe ignoring or not doing a great job on,
Okay.
or whatever? But it's so relevant. Like,
Oh, sure.
or people who have pain around what's happening, for example, to children at the border, and what we need to create a space where people could talk about that
That's
and a call
awesome.
to action. So, I don't know if you can watch the news
Yeah.
any day and not listen to an immigration story, or open up the paper, whatever. So it's relevant. So, I love Martin Luther King's, one of my favorite quotes is, the church is often a tail light
Okay.
towards
Yes,
justice
yes.
rather than a headlight.
Okay.
And so
Wow.
that's what we want to engage the local churches and the wider church.
So this is
to be
good for
headlights.
alums and church leaders and those who are
Absolutely.
thinking
Anyone
about.
interested?
Okay.
Anyone interested?
That is wonderful.
Yeah.
And they can register probably online.
Through the NES.
Through the NES website. Go to
Yes.
events and-
Yeah, you can very easily, and I think it's a great deal. It's like $25,
Yeah.
but includes your lunch.
Hey,
Alumni
that's
are
great.
free, students
Oh,
are
sure.
free. And if someone can't afford the $25, please contact
Okay.
contact me or Maria,
Okay.
and we'll work something out.
That's
Yeah,
phenomenal.
we want everyone to come who wants to be engaged and wants to learn about immigration.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for talking to us. It's
Oh, you're
been awesome.
welcome.
You know, one of
Thanks for
the
giving me the opportunity.
pet peeves of all our viewers is we never actually have the cup of coffee. So
Oh.
yeah, so there's proof on
I was
camera.
gonna say, should I not drink the coffee?
No, I
want the
mean that's the
coffee.
thing. They're like, you go get coffee and you never drink it.
Oh,
And
I've
we're
been
like,
drinking coffee.
we
Yeah,
have
yeah.
such a great conversation.
I
We
can't look
never-
at coffee and not drink.
Right, okay. See, there we go. Yes, it's been wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Gerhardt. We appreciate
You're
it.
very welcome. Thank you.